Welcome to Long Term. I'm Ty King, and this podcast, we've been talking about so many different styles of overcoming adversity from a lot of different subject matters. I was just talking before the show with our guest here about how we even got started with this show, which was looking into how people overcame substance use issues or childhood traumas. We came across, the dual diagnoses and talked to psychologists. And it's kind of led us down to, we're starting off 2026. This is the second episode that we've recorded this year. And really looking forward to focusing this year on more stories of overcoming things that you would never think you would ever be in that position to overcome, right? And talking to the people that have done that, not only gone through it, but found success on the other end. So without that, I won't hold anything back. If you haven't yet, subscribe and make sure you share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. But with that, I'll go ahead and get started and introduce you to Dan Magler. Dan, so good to have you on here.
Thanks. So great to be here. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, cold and everything, right?
Yeah, it's always in Chicago, particularly right now. It's a little bit chilly.
Yeah. You just got back from a trip. Got a little bit of jet lag. Yeah. So Dan, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I am a social worker at a high school and in private practice. And then I'm also passionate about lacrosse. I play in an old man's league and I coach my son's team. I have two sons and a beautiful wife and a 15-year-old two-tooth Patterdale Terrier named Mariska. I used to always say she had 3 teeth, but she lost one over the winter break. So she's down to 2. And yeah, my days and time just get caught up between fantasy football and whatnot, but also just working with my clients as much as I can.
That's incredible. And what kind of clients do you have?
Most of my clients are people in their 20s to 30s who are just dealing with life stuff. A lot of them were my former students at the high school where I work.
Wow.
And then when they needed a therapist, 5-10 years later, they look me up and reach out to me. And I just help them manage anything from getting married to dealing with divorces or trying to get pregnant or all the different life bumps that come along the way.
Of course. And I assume that you've been through a few of those.
Yes. And as we all have. Yeah, and that's, a lot of my other work surrounds Paws for Patrick, which is a nonprofit organization that I'm on the board for. And I got involved with that because Patrick Romer, who was one of my students at Lake Forest High School, in May of 2020, he died by suicide. And when you're a social worker and a therapist, that's pretty much the worst thing that you can possibly deal with. And it's just an incredible feeling of failure that you're supposed to be responsible for this person's mental health. And you're supposed to be trying to help them get better. And when that doesn't happen, it's absolutely devastating. And I was fortunate enough that Patrick's family reached out to me when people set up a GoFundMe for them after Patrick's death. And people poured in money to it. And they said, we don't really need this money. We want to do something to honor his legacy. And so they created an organization that they weren't sure what they wanted it to be, but they knew it had to be about mental health and it had to be about animals. Because Patrick loved his dog Cece, and she was really what helped him to get through the hardest days. So Paws for Patrick helps connect young people with mental health issues to emotional support animals. We'll pay people's adoption fees if they adopt from a shelter, or if they need an ESA letter so they can live in no pet housing, then they can, we'll connect them with a therapist who will write that letter for them so that they don't have to pay the pet fees and the pet deposit. And for me, that ability to give back after that loss was so incredibly central in my healing. And I didn't realize how important it was to me until that next January, my nephew died by suicide. And it's one thing to lose one of your clients. It's devastating as a professional. But then in your own family, I was there at my nephew's apartment when after my brother found him and was with him when the police are taking his body away. And, again, it's one thing to be able to tell one of my clients, listen, your family does not want to find your body, but another thing to go through that on both ends. But again, for me, the thing that helped me get through that was the service work that I was able to do with Paws for Patrick, to say, I can't take away all depression, all anxiety, but I can do something about it by trying to connect with other people and trying to be of service to others. So for me, on the darkest days when I was questioning myself and the way I dealt with everything and that's what you do after a loss is, that stage of grief called bargaining, where we're asking ourselves, what could I have done better? What could I have done differently? I would just say, all right, this way madness lies. It's like trying to, solve a Rubik's Cube. It's not actually going to fix anything. But if I can do something to help people out, now I'm going to feel a little bit better.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's amazing that you, I mean, you picked this up, you built this, the nonprofit, and obviously the family entrusted you enough to, to take care of this. So I know that part of it was that Patrick, really loved his dog, and like they wanted to incorporate animals. For you, why was it a clear decision to? I mean, why is it clear that animals, I guess, help in therapy at all? With a human being.
Well, so many people will just tell you when like, as I walk my dog around the neighborhood, I don't know the names of so many of my neighbors, but I know the names of their dogs. And people will come up to me and they'll just ask how my dog is doing, whatnot.
Yeah.
And they make an easy icebreaker for people who are dealing with, say, social anxiety. So we all have, or one of the things I love about bringing animals into the mental health discussion is it reduces the stigma because people will tell you how their cat, how their dog, how whichever just helped them through a really tough time. They're the best therapists because they just listen without any judgment. It doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't matter how much money you have. Your animal loves you no matter what. And the best therapist in the world isn't going to be there at 3 a.m, but your animal will be. So incorporating that, but then the research, there's this Dr. Janet Oy-Gerlach of University of Toledo, and she's done some research to find out how does this work and why does it work? And they found that actually making eye contact with your dog will stimulate oxytocin, which is that connection hormone. And so happens in the brain of both the human and the animal. But one of the findings of her research was really fascinating to me is that cats are actually slightly more effective than dogs in helping with symptoms of depression, which I always, I think most of us, I'm kind of a dog person, but, this idea of, I don't know if it's the stroking the cat, whatnot, but it helps reduce that cortisol, lowering that heart rate, lowering that blood pressure, but then also stimulating the oxytocin. So it's really amazing. But again, I don't know if you know anybody who's a pet owner who isn't just a
Yeah.
little bit obsessed with their pet.
Of course, yeah, and I could see the stress levels and everything with good dog ownership. Sometimes they're a little bit more needy than a cat is.
Yeah. Yeah.
I always tell people I like when other people have dogs because I get the best parts. I get to stay over and just like
Hmm.
pet them, go for walks, and get all the good parts. And then I'm like, okay, the rest of it's yours. You get to fix the rest of that. But yeah, cat just kind of does its own thing.
Yeah. Well, that's what we're actually about. My son's been after me for a while to adopt a cat, but as you said, we just got back from the Philippines, so I wasn't going to adopt an animal and then go away for 2 weeks because they need that time with you.
No, yeah,
I had a session with a client just before this earlier today, though, and she was really struggling because she had to rehome her bird because she just didn't have the finances to take it to the vet and to take care of it. And that is a really hard thing for people. So it's not like we want, as a therapist, I don't tell every person that you should just get an animal. If you're not in a situation where you can take care of it, we never want to put an animal in a bad position. So Paws for Patrick, we might say, we never say no, but we might say not yet. If you want to have an animal in your dorm room and the only thing you love is a St. Bernard, that's probably not going to be a great plan. So, how can we make sure that that pairing is sustainable and that connection? Because it is really sad. There was one woman I was helping who she was in a homeless shelter and she would not leave that homeless shelter unless she could bring her dog with her. And a lot of places wouldn't allow the animal. But her dog was 18 years old and saying, okay, well, we now also need to create a transition plan for after your animal does pass away because our pets, unless it's like a gray parrot or a tortoise, it's not going to outlive us. So we need to know. And that's for Patrick, that was a devastating thing when his dog Cece died, a major source of support. So when bringing any kind of resource into our lives, we also have to say, what am I going to do so I'm not just fully dependent on that one thing? So if my thing is going for walks, if my thing is music, what if I don't have access to that for a little while? How can I handle that?
and it seems like for someone who may be emotionally shut down,
Hmm.
or they may not be ready or prepared to even process their feelings, rather than sit in the office with a therapist where it's kind of uncomfortable. I've been in that position myself where it's like, I don't want to talk to this person and I'm going to give you minimal answers. You know what I mean? Because I'm
Hmm.
just not ready. Because really, I'm not internally prepared to have the conversation at all. But it seems so much like, I guess, have you seen more people be more willing to, show affection to a pet, you know what I mean, before they're able to open up to a human?
Without question. And that's what we also at Paws for Patrick, we have a therapy dog program where we have some volunteers who have their own dog that's been trained to be a therapy dog, and they go out and visit with people, and sometimes at partial hospitalization programs where teenagers are working through things. And often we'll see kids who are just not willing to open up and talk to anybody. But when the dog gets there, they might start sharing something. And so frequently, it's hard to open up and make eye contact with someone. But when you have something else that you can do with your hands, when you're stroking that dog, that animal, it can make it a little bit easier to open up. So yeah, we've seen that quite a bit.
That's incredible. Um, for Patrick, who was, one of your students, obviously, had the rest of, I guess, the part of that class have kept up with Pause for Patrick or been involved in any way?
A number of his friends were initially really involved, and his younger sister and older brother are still on the board along with his parents. But it's, like I was actually, I had a conversation with one of his good friends and classmates earlier today. And, there's things about him every day, but for some of them, it's really hard and painful to still be a part of that. So they promote the organization where they can, but direct involvement, not as much. And we're opening up new opportunities for volunteers so for some of the volunteers we have at Paws for Patrick, there are opportunities to check in with the people that we've helped, because we've helped people in all 50 states now, connecting them to animals. But now checking back in and saying, how's your process going? Because so many organizations, they just help you, but then they don't follow up with you at all. And so that's one of the things we're trying to do, is to stay connected to people. So often what people need is a sense of community and a sense that just somebody cares about them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I hear about, the pause, or the pause programs that they send into, like, women's prisons to get
Yep,
them
that
sort of
kind of thing.
acclimated and give them same concept, you know what I mean? I would assume. For yourself, and I know you said that you mentioned your nephew earlier, and that was probably a pretty dark time. And I know you mentioned how you like to use humor in your
hmm
own personal approach to therapy. And so, like, how's it? I always ask doctors this because it's like, how do you go into a hospital and continue to serve when I know you've got your own personal life things going on at the same time? Did you find it more difficult, or did you have a time where you needed to process this before yourself, before you saw anybody else and helped them with their own issues?
I was really nervous about that because I literally, the day that, again, it was January 24th, my wife's birthday, when I found out that my nephew died. And I went over again to his apartment. And then that next day was a school day and I had to go into work. And that day I had to do a suicide risk assessment. And I was thinking of, even on the drive in, how will I make sure I'm keeping that separate and handle it? And will I overreact? Will I just automatically send anyone to the hospital because I'm afraid of making a mistake? And fortunately, I was able to compartmentalize and say, you know what? No, let me take this just one step at a time. And I think the best advice I ever got when I was in grad school was, when in doubt, consult. If you're afraid to consult, you're probably doing something wrong. So on that case with the student that I was dealing with, I went to one of my coworkers and just, hey, check my thinking. Am I doing this correctly right now? Would you do the same thing? And I think, she agreed with me. We decided not to send that student on to the hospital and say, okay, so I'm not overreacting. But my natural impulse is to do a coping skill called intellectualizing. And that's where you'll kind of take any of the uncomfortable feelings, and instead of feeling them, I'll take the elevator from my guts up to my brain and I'll just think about them. But the negative impact that that's had on me over the course of my life is it's made me a little bit separate from my emotions. And that can be a problem when you're trying to connect with people. So then I had to really schedule and make time for myself to let myself tap into my feelings and to feel sad, to feel anger, to feel discomfort. And the way I was able to do that partially is just putting on either like sad music, a movie that draws out emotion in me, and literally petting my dog while I was doing it. So I had that bracing thing so I could have both the discomfort and the comfort at the same time. In therapy, we always talk about we never want to open a door that we can't close. So when I'm telling other people that, okay, you're going to need to sit with this negative feeling, but I might say, set a timer, write, open up and journal for like 15 minutes, and then say, okay, you're going to need a whole hour here. So you then put on some music that's going to change your mood, go work out after. So I was doing some of those things, trying to give myself some of the same advice. Sit with that feeling, be uncomfortable. The hardest piece going forward has still been bringing up the concept of my nephew to my brother, and saying like, hey, what do you think Brian would think of, this thing that's happening on TV right now, or with the Chicago Bears, or whatever else it is, because you almost never want to bring that person up. But one of my friends, Melissa, who runs this Lost Survivors podcast called Leftover Pieces, she often on her podcast talks about how it's just people do want to hear their kids' names. So I have to remind myself of that like, we want to realize that these people did matter. So I bring up Patrick when I talk to his parents, and I bring up my nephew when I can get myself to do so. But every time it feels uncomfortable.
Yeah, I would imagine so. Um, I know you mentioned earlier a little bit about how, animals can bridge that gap between you and like developing empathy, right?
hmm
I saw a good quote yesterday. Just, when you go through people's stories, like every once in a while, there's like something that pops out, and you're like, oh, I like that. And it sticks with you. It's one of
hmm
those. where I said a person's ability to grow is directly linked to the ability to stay with the ugly truths about yourself and not run. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And so I was like, well, that's so true. Being able, like what you were talking about, where you have to sort of let that gut to brain elevator, that you're talking about, feeling it all. You've got to be able to sit there and face it all and sit in it, and that's how you develop growth. And I noticed that's how a lot of people that we've interviewed very on this very show, that's sort of the thing that they did. It's very uncomfortable, and
Mhm.
we like to take shortcuts. We like to pig out on snack food and rather than deal with our feelings or
Mhm.
type of things. So is there anything about being with animals that develops empathy that we should know about?
I think, one of the things that people don't realize is that a lot of the people who are getting help for depression, for anxiety, they get tired of feeling like they're a burden to others and like they're always the one being helped. And by being with the animal, you see that you can easily see how it's reciprocal, how you, even when you're taking them for a walk or you're giving them food, but they're giving you something back all the time. When I have to get up in the morning and take Mariska for a walk, but it's still getting me out of bed and getting me moving. So often when I'm writing an ESA letter for someone, they're just telling me about that reciprocal nature and how that develops our empathy, because we can put ourselves in the position. People will not take care of themselves. They'll say, I won't remember to eat. I won't go take a bath, but I remember I have to get up and do my routines because I have to feed my cat. I have to feed my dog. So it helps to develop that empathy because we're taking ourselves out of just myself and having to think about someone else. But they're almost supernatural ability, cats and dogs, to feel what we're feeling, to know, to come over and spend time with us when something bad has happened, when we have a hard day at work, when we're in a fight with our romantic partner. It's just, how do they know how to do that? I don't know how they do this that they do. But I mean, it's just incredible and makes us feel so much better and so much more connected.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't know why animals are very emotionally aware of their owners, and they know when you feel bad and they'll come over and let you know.
Hmm.
That's awesome. But dang, thank you so much for talking to us about all of this. And like yeah, it's enlightening. It's kind of those things where it's like you kind of, obviously a lot of people have been around, dogs, cats, animals like that, or have had them at one point in time and realize, I like animals, but not really realizing what it's doing for you, I guess, emotionally and,
Hmm.
developmentally on the inside as a human being. So I appreciate you doing that. I'll let you off on a lighter question on the end. I know you're in Chicago. Best pizza in Chicago. Where's it at?
I'm going to go with Giordano's. So
Really?
there's
Okay.
several Giordano's around, but
Yeah.
I love their again, a lot of them will claim that they're the originators of the thick crust
Yeah.
pizza there, our stuffed pizza, but Giordano's, for my money, they're the best.
Okay, good. I've been there. So I've been to Chicago twice in the past year. Loved it. I mean,
Hmm.
if there was anywhere else I was going to love to move to, I'd move to Chicago. I love it there. Went to Giordano's because I saw the great reviews, but the line was all the way around the building. I was like, oh, there's no way I'm going to sit here. It looks great, but someday I'll come back when it's not as busy.
Yeah, order
So,
ahead and pick up, and then just go eat it in a park somewhere.
oh, that's smart. Yeah, I should just do that. Great. Well, Dan, if people want to keep up with you or for Positive Patrick, where would they go for that? I know you have your own podcast.
Hmm. So
Hmm.
for Paws for Patrick, they could just go to pawsforpatrick.org. And if they're 30 or younger, or they're parenting someone, then, and they have any kind of mental health issue, if they'd like to help adopting an animal, we can help them out with that. Or if they need an ESA letter. As far as concerned, my podcast is called Not Allowed to Die, and it's about mental health topics from the therapist perspective. So if you've ever wondered, what is a therapist really thinking when someone farts in the office or does whichever, and you just want to know how are they thinking, how are they handling that, you can write questions into me at dmaiglerlcsw@gmail.com, and just tune into the podcast where Mariska and I answer the questions and talk about the dilemmas that I see in my practice.
Perfect. And we'll put all that information in the show notes too, if you're listening and you want to see what else Dan is up to. And so I really appreciate you taking the time here. I know you're jet lagged and feeling a little bit under the weather. And so, yeah, but you did perfectly. You sound good and you smoothly went all the way through this conversation. So, um, for listeners, if you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe. We always ask that, but also the main thing is to spread this message. If you know somebody out there that needs to hear this, needs to hear something that Dan said here today about how animals can help you, even when you're not ready to talk or develop, think about the way you're feeling about a very certain topic or something like that, like animals are a great entryway for that, great entryway to your own personal growth, and they're healthy. Like you said, I never really thought of it this way, but it kind of forces you into the habits of, grooming yourself and maintenance, and even when you feel at your worst. And like if you're depressed and can't get out of bed, still your dog's got to go outside for a little while, and it gets you out, which is great. So that's incredible. So share this episode with someone that should benefit from hearing it. I always tell people that the worst that can happen is they won't listen to it, but the best thing that could happen is it could change their life. So I appreciate you all for being here each and every episode. I appreciate Dan for being a great guest this time, and we will see you in the next episode of Long Term.